Hi everyone, my name is Cindy Crum and I'm the CEO of MobileMoxie based in Denver, Colorado. We do mobile SEO and ASO consulting as well as technical and international SEO consulting. And today I'm going to talk to you guys about language and SEO and the impact of SEO. Now this presentation was originally given at Friends of Search in Amsterdam and Brussels, and then also at Search Y in Paris. And in those instances, I did an in-language intro so that everyone could laugh at my bad Dutch and French. But I'm going to leave that and just give you a wave and say hello in English and get straight on to the talk. Now, when we talk about language and SEO, I think that coffee is a good metaphor for language because coffee is kind of like an international language. People drink it everywhere. There are different variations, but ultimately it's to wake you up in the morning or keep you going in the afternoon. And it's something that people look forward to and bond over and things like that. So coffee is a good metaphor for an international language. And in SEO, you know by now that Google cares about language a lot. We've had a lot of changes and discussion recently coming out of Google about things like BERT and Albert and the Natural Language API, and of course a big focus on hreflang and Elmo and things like that. We're getting all these new processes and words that somehow factor into the algorithm. And I think that it's important to note that mobile has played a big part in pushing this kind of change because in mobile, there's less screen size. And so it's more important for Google to get it right the first time without giving you a huge screen with lots of options for you to click on and you feel happy no matter what. On the small screen, there's less space and there's more pressure to understand language and get it right very quickly. But also, of course, there's the push of voice search coming from mobile and coming from virtual assistants and things like that. And so Google has had to get more advanced, not only in the language results, but their understanding of language as a whole. And this is how we can get differences in queries like this, where Google understands that there's a difference between a red stoplight, which is something that you might see when you're driving, or stoplight red, which is more of a lipstick color or maybe a nail polish color, right? It's a descriptor rather than an object. And Google just gets this intuitively. And that actually takes a lot of sophisticated understanding for Google to be able to do things like that. But of course, Google sometimes still needs help, right? When words have multiple meanings, jaguar could be an animal, but it could also very much be a car. And so there's still the need for disambiguation and deeper understanding or hints to help Google understand what you're really looking for in an ambiguous query. And of course, it gets even more complicated because one language can have lots of different variations or localizations. And in SEO, we often deal with this by making multiple pages for the different languages and separating them and linking them all together with hreflang attributes. Or maybe doing it, maybe you don't need separate pages. Maybe you're just handling it with JavaScript, which is a bit more complex for Google, but maybe not out of the realm of possibilities for something that they could understand. But it does, in general, make it complicated, but at its essence, Google has to understand language because searches are based on words that are in languages. Our keywords are, of course, in a language. And so the algorithms are language specific to some degree. And this has to be true because when you go from one keyword phrase to another, sometimes in one language, something that is described with one word needs 3 words to describe it in other languages, or vice versa. And so the algorithms are language specific, and they just have to be to have the deepest understanding. It's not just matching and query density or things like that. But what's interesting is with language at its core, Google reports look like this, and they include things like query pages, countries, devices, search appearance, and dates. But what they don't include is language at all. They don't even mention it. And that's interesting that this is just kind of glossed over because it seems so important to what Google really does. And of course, with SEO, it gets even more complicated in places where multiple official languages are spoken, which is many, many countries around the world have multiple official languages or unofficial languages. And I know, if we're in Europe, I know what the Europeans are thinking right now. Look, isn't it cute? The Americans figured out that outside of America, people speak lots of different languages and things are different around the world. And yes, that may be true. I'll give you some credit to laugh at me there, but I have lived outside of the US and I've been doing international SEO for a long time. And in fact, it's something that my company specializes in and has spent a lot of time researching to the point that we have a 5-part, very long series written about entity understanding with language and how it's related to mobile first indexing. Because of course, our first love is mobile, but we think that the shift to mobile first indexing was largely based on entity understanding, which at its core is language understanding. So we've written and researched a lot about this, and I do recommend that you read this series, although I'll warn you, it is quite long and heavy, very detailed. But language is important for SEO, of course, but also just in general important for businesses. This is why we spend the time and the effort to translate content into different languages. And it's especially important if your business targets tourists or immigrants, if your website facilitates any kind of international business, if you serve international clientele, or even if you're just trying to get links, having content in languages that are widely spoken is a good way to increase your ability to get more links. So language is important from a business perspective too. And I would hope that if you are in a country that has multiple official or unofficial languages spoken, that you're doing a good job there. And maybe if you're not, the rest of this talk will encourage you to take that next step and to push that a little bit farther and to take your SEO into the other languages as well. Because I can't emphasize enough how important the understanding is on mobile and getting it right and ranking is on mobile with language. But what you have to understand here is that something that most SEOs are ignoring is language settings. And language settings come from a phone. Or on your desktop, you have your language settings that you can set up from Google. They'll default to whatever the computer setting is. So what I'd like to do now is have you asked yourself or ask your friends, when was the last time you changed the language settings on your phone? Was it last week? Was it last month? Was it last year? Do you even know how to change the language settings on your phone? Now, I know that most people don't know. They would have to look and hunt to change the language settings on the phone or even the search settings on their phone. It's not something that we do every day, but it's important to understand that it's not something that we do every day if you're marketing to countries where people are likely to be multilingual, because if they're likely multilingual, they likely search in all the languages that they can speak pretty interchangeably, and they're doing that without changing the language settings on the phone. Now, this is going to become important in SEO, and you'll see why in a minute. But let's start with the beginning. Let's make sure everyone knows what we're talking about. When we talk about language and the things that impact a query, there are a couple different places where people can get confused. Many people think that the Google version, the country version of Google that you're searching, has a big impact, and it used to. So these are things like google.de, google.co.uk. It used to, and it does still to a small degree, but Google's tried to consolidate and make these differences much smaller because it was a lot to maintain all of the different country versions of Google. So there's the country version of Google, and then there's the query language, which is what language is the keyword that you've written in. And then there's the search language setting or the phone setting, and that is the one that's buried, that's hard to find, but you can tell what language your settings are in by the top navigation. If it's written in English, then your phone settings are in English. If it's written in Dutch, then your phone settings are in Dutch. And this setting can actually change the result of a query much more than you might think. So I want to go into some details about how these three things can work together to impact things like the knowledge graph and how Google understands whether or not a query fits into some part of what they call the topic layer or the knowledge graph. It's how Google is able to classify what the query that you submit is related to. And what we found in our studies is the more aligned your different language or linguistic signals are, the easier it is for Google to feel confident about something being related to a specific topic. And then the more confusing your signals are, the harder it is. But they respond different ways. In some cases, if they're confused, they'll show you translations or pictures or more general information. Or if they're certain, they might show you a lot of position zero results, a lot of featured snippets, things like this. So it's important to understand this when you're thinking about zero-click searches. And what everyone's concerned about right now in SEO is Google taking all the traffic. Knowing how language fits in can help you find opportunities that you're probably missing. Because this is SEMrush data that I got from SEMrush on Friday. What they can tell us, and what I've gotten verified from other companies as well, is that the likelihood of knowledge graph and featured snippet changes both between desktop and mobile, and between language. And in some cases, it changes quite a bit. Some languages are much more likely to return featured snippets or knowledge graph than others. So if you are targeting multiple languages, it might be relevant for you to know which languages are more likely to have featured snippets and knowledge graph and which ones aren't, because it's more easy to get visibility when you're not being blocked by knowledge graph or featured snippet. Or if you think you can get featured snippets, then that's important to know too. So we know that Google is really doing a much better job at processing language now, because they've been talking about the natural language API, and you can take content from your page and put it in to this system that they have to test the API to see how does Google classify the entities in your search. And at the core of this is them being able to guess or understand what language the content is written in the first place, because they're being very specific and breaking things down in very specific ways based on how the grammar of the language they're assuming works and how the words relate to each other. And so if they can't get that from your content, then they can't rank it for the right things. And so let's look at a specific example where I have on this phone, you can tell that the phone language is set to Hindi, because even the ad notification up here is in Hindi. The call to action on the Amazon shopping button is in Hindi. And when we activate it, we can scroll through and see that I searched in English with English characters. But every now and then, you see the Hindi characters calling me to click or to translate, coming across in Hindi. So I searched in English. Let's go back. I searched in English with English characters, but because my phone is set to Hindi, Google is assisting me and saying, we think that you prefer Hindi, so we're going to show you knowledge graph in Hindi, even though the rest of the result is matching the query language. So Google is trying really hard to honor the wishes of their users by serving the content in the language that they prefer. But you should know that the knowledge graph, if it's there, is going to match often the phone language rather than the query language if there's a difference, even if they conflict. And you only get one language. So even if on your phone you've set multiple languages that you speak English and Dutch and French, whichever one you've put as primary is the one that Google is going to count when they're evaluating what to show you in a search result. So what you need to know then is that changing the language of a query is not enough to get a valid test result. If you're testing something on your phone, just changing the language of the query and going from shoes to zapatos is not enough to get a valid test result because you haven't changed the language that Google thinks the query is in. So you have to not only change the keyword, but you have to change the language setting to get a valid result. And similarly, just changing the country to google.es is not going to be good enough either. You're going to have to get all three if what you want is to test a result from Spain in Spanish. So in reality, because people are multilingual and we forget as SEOs that they have one default language setting on their devices and that that's impacting all of their searches, when people are multilingual, you really need to see real results. And that's especially true if there's a local intent in the query, because then the results are not only changing by the country version and the language setting and the language of the query, but they're also changing based on where the person is specifically in space relative to other things. And I know this already sounds like very complicated. I know, to talk about coffee and you're probably all wanting more coffee. Wake up your brain right now, because this is complicated stuff. But the issue is, I think this is really well put by Matthew. He says, my issue with data is that making us optimize for what's easiest to measure, that it's making us optimize for what's easiest to measure while ignoring what's difficult to measure. And so I see this happening in SEO a lot, where SEOs have all these tools to give them numeric results of what some kind of system assumes the SEO wants to know about a specific language or a specific query, but it's not actually reflective of reality very often, especially in these mixed situations where people have only one default language setting on their phone that they're not changing, but they're multilingual. And this is, especially common in some places, and especially in Europe. So let's look at a case study. Let's figure out how this really plays into our jobs as SEOs. So we're going to do one with local intent. And what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that we're at the Google offices in Zurich. And Zurich is a great test case because there are 4 official languages in Switzerland: French, German, Italian, and Romansh. We're going to skip Romansh. Not that many people speak it. We're going to focus on German, French, and Italian. And we're going to do the search as if we're 3 people sitting right next to each other at the Google offices using the exact same phone. And so if you're an SEO for a project like this, you might have a SEMrush account that looks like this. You can see in the box in the top, I have it set for Zurich, Switzerland, and I have a keyword group for German, and I'm looking at the German keywords here. And then I have a keyword group for Zurich, Switzerland, and it's Italian. And then I have a group for Zurich, Switzerland, and it's French. And so that's how most people would do it, right? The problem is, because the language settings don't necessarily match with the query that people are searching, these results that you might be getting from SEMrush, if you're looking at the featured snippets or position 0, they're not always going to be the same. So you can see in this query, I submitted it with from the Google offices in Zurich, first in English. The query is for espresso. First in Italian. The query is for espresso, and you can see what the Italian results look like. But then we go to the bottom and we'll click on German. And so now we have side by side. On the left, we have Italian, what it was originally. And on the right, we have now German. Now you see immediately that the republic.it set is missing. It's replaced with knowledge graph, and we get the map result. Now the map result is also in the Italian version, but it's a little bit different. And as we scroll down, we can see that there are more and more changes happening between the 2 results. And on the right, then we switch again to French and see that now we have even a video carousel in that wasn't in the Italian one. So what you're seeing is there are different inclusions, different kinds of results showing up for the same query, espresso, with the different language setting. All we did is we changed the language setting. We didn't move an inch. So let's see what those results actually look like when they're not moving. This time we did it with coffee, the word coffee. Now coffee, in these 3 languages, coffee is not correct in any of them. It's spelled differently in all 3. But So it's always going to be a mismatch here. So what you can see is it's to some degree from standing in the same spot impacting the map and the order of the map results. That could be just fluke. But go down lower with the settings. The setting on the left is the one that's set for a German default language setting. The middle one is the French language setting on the phone, and the right one is the Italian language setting on the phone. And you can see that just below the map, you can see on all three, we're just below the map. We have coffeezurich.com on the first two, German and French, but not on Italian. And we have images, but the images are different. And then we have a Wikipedia result for the French and the Italian, but they look different. They have different images. Go down further on German, we have search by image. It also appears lower down for French. We haven't seen it yet for Italian, but we do see a YouTube video. Oh, it's at the very bottom, search by photo. So these are different results. And remember, we're standing at the exact same spot. And you can look into the details. The results are different. And each time the keyword was coffee spelled in English, right? So results are different. If you want to see the list, this is what the list looks like for German, French, and Italian. When we search for coffee, things have been highlighted. So the thing that's in common in all of them is the top and the bottom. We have maps on all of them, and we have related searches at the bottom. They all include search by image, and two of them include a different image result. They all three include a Wikipedia result. But other than that, there aren't a lot of similarities. And when we block out what Google takes, the stuff that's directly from Google, this is what it looks like. It's a bit stark. It looks like there's just not a lot to fight for here after the stuff that Google gets is taken out. But then let's look and see. The only two sites that appear in two languages are vertical.coffee and Coffee Zurich, other than Wikipedia. They don't count. So we're getting, somewhat wildly different results for the same query standing in the same place just because of the language settings. So, okay, maybe you don't care because you're like, well, that doesn't matter because English doesn't match. You need to do it matching. So fine, new test, we'll do it matching. We'll do the exact same query, except we'll match it up and we'll spell coffee in German, we'll spell coffee correctly in French, and we'll spell coffee correctly in Italian. Now, this is what those results look like. And I'm going to highlight it for you. We've got the map. That's the same on all of them. And we've got knowledge graph on two of them, related carousel on two of them, search by image on two of them. People also ask in different places on these two, German and French. Wikipedia, again, fine. But just notice how different these are. And remember, the only thing that we've changed is the language setting of the phone, which is what we all forget about. We don't even necessarily know until you look at the language of your navigation what your language setting is. If you're bilingual, if you speak English and Dutch, do you even think about changing between the two? Probably not. Interesting finds only comes up in German. Related searches on all of them. But this is how different they look when you show them all at once. So they're quite different, again. The only site that comes up in two languages is Zurich.com, other than Wikipedia. Again, that doesn't count. Look at this one, cafe.ch really dominates in Italian, but doesn't dominate anywhere else. So if you're cafe.ch and you're only tracking with an Italian setting, you might think that you've really hit the jackpot, but you might be also missing 2/3 of the market or more if you're not looking at how this word is performing with different default language settings. Coffee Circle in German shows up for the .com and the .ch. Coffee Central, 2.ch results. Timeout and an image carousel from timeout.com. Trottet.ch split up by people also ask. You'll notice when we start highlighting these things, you can see it on the cafe.ch on the right. Google likes to split up blocks of one domain with inclusions like knowledge graph and stuff like that. We see Zurich.com again for two languages only, not all three. So, okay, Maybe you think this is a dumb test. You're like, duh, Cindy. It's a different keyword. It's a different language. Of course, the results are different. We're not learning anything yet. Okay, maybe. We might learn more when we block out again the stuff from Google. That makes it seem much harder to compete, especially when you see what's really already some pretty solid positions from a couple brands that have really strong ranking signals. In all of these languages, you're really kind of fighting for scraps. You're fighting for maybe 3 or 4 spots if you can't knock out the big time winners like Wikipedia or like cafe.ch in Italian. So again, I want to remind you of the concept that I mentioned earlier, because this becomes more important now. Changing the language of the query is not enough to get a valid test if you're testing on your phone. Changing the country version is not enough to get a valid test. Again, you have to change all 3, the country version of Google, the query language of the keyword, and the language setting. So final test to show you how this really pans out for multilingual places like Zurich. So again, 3 people standing together with the exact same phone. This time we're going to search for the keyword coffee, spelled in German, but with default settings of German, French, and Italian. So you can see these are side by side. Again, we have the map, but from there, the results are completely different, just based on the language setting. And that's what you have after Google takes its cut. Same thing in French. We're spelling coffee in French and searching it in German, French, and Italian. All 3 of them have maps. 2 of them have Wikipedia. They all have search by image and related searches. But German has, again, a translation and a knowledge graph, and only French has people also ask. So Google was only confident enough to do a people also ask when the query language and the language setting match. And again, this is what's left after Google takes its cut. And these are the sites that show up more than once. So the only one here that you get on all 3 is Zurich.com. They're a strong performer here for all of these languages. You do see Harry's Ding.ch and this other one that I probably can't pronounce into the Zeringer.ch. That results in 2, but remember, we are not seeing a monolith across all 3 default language settings, okay? So this keyword is performing differently just based on something that we forget, the language setting. And last, checking in Italian with the Italian spelling, checking in German, French, and Italian default language settings. This is what those results look like. They all get a map to get a search by image. German always has the strongest for knowledge graph and interesting finds. This is what it looks like after Google takes its cut. And the only thing that we see in 2 languages is cafe.ch and amici.ch, right? 2 and 2. So my point is, when you're doing SEO, it's better to think like this with your keywords, and when you're tracking them, mash them up and put them together. So you want to think like this and do a lot of things at the same time to handle multilingual searchers rather than one at a time like this. So what that means is when you have a region that has multiple prominent languages and you're setting up keyword tracking in something like SEMrush, I just use SEMrush because it does good screenshots for this. You want to not only put your French keywords in your French language setting group, you want to put all of the keywords in the French language setting group, put all of the keywords in the Italian language setting group, and all of the keywords in the German language setting group, so that you can see how the keywords are performing for the people who are not actually changing the language settings when they alter between the language that they're searching in. Does that make sense? I know it's a bit heavy, and especially for a 9 a.m. talk, this is a lot. That's why I gave you the coffee theme to kind of help get your brain going. But I want you to think a bit more cleverly about how you're tracking keywords and about what the settings actually mean, because these settings that you set up in SEMrush, they're just passing through settings for Google, and searchers don't actually behave in the same way that the tool assumes. That they don't actually go and change the setting on their phone from French to Italian if they're bilingual and speak both, and they search in one language and then the other. They're just not doing that. So doing this and tracking keywords this way can help you highlight real opportunities where perhaps the language understanding by Google isn't as strong and there are fewer knowledge graph or easier to get a featured snippet, or there's less people also ask pushing you down, or less just hosted inclusions from Google taking up all the space, because it just varies by language. So you have to think kind of the mashup of how people actually behave is not as structured as how a lot of SEOs have their SEO tracking, keyword tracking campaigns. And so if you ever want to check and do a spot check that's in reality passing a real location and a real language, MobileMoxie built you a tool that allows you to do this, and it even gives you a radius grid that goes 10 miles and 10 miles if you care about like a coffee shop, and you can see what do you get from this country setting, this language setting, and this keyword, whether they match or not. You can get a real result that Google is passing, and you can put the keywords together in the same group. So you can search from Zurich in French and the same word in Italian and things like that, and then just look to see what does this keyword look like in a real search result. We took out the data for this example, but you can also pull in Google Analytics for this search result from that location and see what does that traffic actually look like for you. So it's a really handy tool because it lets you pretend to be anywhere in the world. You can say I have Lisbon, Zurich, Paris, Berlin, and this is actually more specific than the city or the postcode. It goes all the way down to a street address. It's passing full GPS information as if it was a phone. So it's quite a sophisticated tool if you want to really know what someone with a real phone would be getting. And we can also do things where we track these over time and take screen caps of the result so you can see how did this result change. And it doesn't mean you have to look at it. Let's say you can set it up for daily, weekly, or monthly. Let's say you set it up for weekly. It doesn't mean you need to check it weekly, but it does mean that if something changes in your data and you notice it next month, you can go back in and see what did the search result look like before this happened and what did it look like after, and get a real understanding of what's changed. And you can even export this. We have this button that says export to Google Sheets in the upper right-hand side under saved reports, export to Google Sheets. It passes all the information, the keyword, the phone. You can do 2 phones at a time. You can change the locations, and all you do is click the run test button with the little phone, and it passes all that information up to the tool that we showed with Espresso. And you can see live, what does it look like right now? So that's pretty cool. So remember, when you're thinking about this and when you're thinking about your keyword tracking in this new way, the zero-click searches are up, and the things that are taking your traffic away are often not in your analytics, especially Search Console. Google isn't reporting about, is there a people also ask, is there a knowledge graph, stuff like that. They're just expecting you to figure it out, and they're kind of expecting you to test, or maybe they're hoping you won't. We don't know. But just remember that a lot of the time, this information just isn't there, and it isn't obvious. It isn't made obvious unless you're using other tools. But you should be doing spot testing as well and looking at real results, and not just looking at the numbers. The numbers don't actually tell you enough to do a great job, and they won't show you where there's a huge opportunity or where there's a huge blocker that's going to take a lot of traffic and visibility away from any ranking, even a position 1 ranking. Rank Ranger also gave me data last Friday to show that country by country, the results with featured snippets are different. They're seeing for desktop in the US, about 8.4% of results have a featured snippet. In the UK, it's only 5.7%, but in Germany, it's 9%. We see a lot of stuff happening coming out of Germany, but these also change from mobile to desktop, and in a somewhat inconsistent way, because you can see for the UK and US, featured snippets are more common in mobile, but for Germany, they're less common in mobile. So interesting stuff, worth noting, worth thinking about, because if there are a lot of featured snippets, either you think you can get them and you have a strategy that you can deploy to get them, or you think maybe you can't, maybe the competition is too stiff, and maybe you should focus on other languages where you can get them or where there's less competition and it's easier to rank well, or there's less position zero just in general. So the other thing to know is that sometimes featured snippets change language settings, even if they're written in the same language. So this is a search for best coffee mugs, and you can see that image is of a Yeti coffee mug, and it's from foodandwine.com. And if we scroll down to the bottom and change the language, eventually, so we'll change it from English to German, and same query, still in English, but now it's from a different site called thespruce.com, and it has a different pick for the best coffee mug. It's a Le Creuset coffee mug. So what does this all mean, right? I know I've given you a lot of information and a lot to think about, but what do you do? Well, number one, I want you to start not relying exclusively on the numbers in your analytics, because they can mask the impact of position zero and the Google inclusions and those gray things I was blocking out of the SERPs. You actually need to do real tests and pass real information to see what's happening. Always use SEO tools that let you specify the search language to test in, and then always be aware that you're going to get different opportunities that are caused by the language settings that people just forget to change. They may not even know how. So you'll get different results from language settings if you translate content, and this can help you find more opportunities. And then finally, you just have to be spot checking by passing all the real information with real full locations, not just city centroids or some things like that. Pass real locations, pass real language settings, and don't just test on your own phone because it's always going to have your language setting and your location. But use tools like the MobileMoxie tools that let you be anywhere and pass the language settings without messing up your phone. Lastly, if you were expecting a talk on hreflang, I'm sorry, that's not what this was. But I do have a couple quick tips related to that. If you're not even sure where to start, or you just want to test if there's opportunity and if you should be translating content, there's an easy way to do that. This is just in Google Sheets. What I've done is that I've got the English column done, and I'll show you. You can use in Google Sheets a formula that will allow you to translate very easy using Google Translate. Now, this is not a good way to do content. You need real people who speak the language to do your content. But if you just want to do kind of a validity test or an opportunity check to see, are there really opportunities in these other languages that might be relevant to my audience, you can take your keyword list like this, use a formula like that in Google Sheets, and it'll automatically translate to all the languages. And you can do it again and again. So I'm going to let it go again. So you can see I've clicked equals Google. You click on Google Translate. You click on the language that your original keyword is in, and then you put in quotes the language that your original keyword is in, and the language you want to translate to. Close the parentheses, and you've got it. Drag it down, and you're there. Do it for Italian too. And now you've got a big long list of keywords that you can actually mash up and put in all of the language settings in your SEMrush or Ahrefs or whatever you're using to track your keywords in Rank Ranger, whatever. But this is how you can see, maybe we don't have French content, but we know that there is a French portion of people in this location that maybe we should be targeting them better. And you can get a sense for that and get a sense for what those rankings might look like and what the opportunity might look like, because it might be easier to get better rankings by just creating a translated version of the page and paying for good translation to rank in the other languages that are less competitive with position zero types of results and Google hosted inclusion types of results. Also, of course, don't forget, do the hreflang. You can use Aleda's free tool to write your hreflang. It's super easy, super awesome. You can use the right tools to validate all of your hreflang very easily, just with one crawl. It'll tell you you've got it right or you've got it wrong. And you can use the Merkle tool to show you the difference between mobile and desktop, because remember, Google's making a big deal about making sure that the hreflang that's represented on your desktop is the same as the hreflang that's represented on the mobile version of the page. So the Merkle tool can help you with that. And remember, life's short, so enjoy your coffee. Thanks for your attention. And if you want to try the tools, I've created a promo code for everyone at Friends of Search. It's just all caps FOS, and that's going to get you 30 days in the MobileMoxie toolset, which is the one that lets you pass the keyword, the language, the specific location, and test over time and stuff like that, 30 days for free. So thanks for your attention. I really appreciate it, and have a great day.